Society builders paved the way to a better world, to a better day. A united approach to building a new society. Join a conversation for social transformation. Society builders. Woo.
Society Builders with your host, Dwayne Veron. Welcome to another exciting episode of Society Builders, and thanks for joining the conversation for social transformation. A quick apology for the short hiatus I've had in getting some of our episodes to air. I had a burst of activity at work which challenged my capacity to produce these episodes. And as the backlog of my episodes grew, it became more and more daunting to get back on the saddle and get caught up. But we're back, and I'm slowly working my way to clearing our backlog and getting back on schedule. So my apologies for this, and a massive thank you in advance for your patience as I try to get caught up again. So in our last episode, we embarked upon a new chapter in our journey, a focus on social action. And we discussed the first two of the 5 principles we'll be exploring here: the need for organic growth for our initiatives, and the need for coherence, getting our beliefs and our practices in alignment, addressing both the material and spiritual needs associated with our progress. Over the next few episodes, we'll be exploring the remaining 3 principles: that our initiative should be participatory, giving agency to all, that they should build capacity, and finally, that they should reflect an approach characterized by learning and action. So we still have a good deal of thought to cover, and today we're going to focus on the first of these remaining 3, that our initiative should be participatory, giving agency to all. There's actually a lot of ground to cover in this one principle, so it's going to require the entirety of today's episode. So let's roll up our sleeves and dig in as we explore this critical principle for effective social action from a Bahá'í perspective. So today we're exploring the principle that our initiative should be participatory, giving agency to all. Now, I think most of us have a good sense of what participation means, but the term agency used in this context may be new for some. So let's start today's episode by exploring what we mean when we say agency. The term agency is an incredibly powerful construct. Really, it's one of the keys to facilitating progress in one's life, to shaping one's own destiny. There's an incredibly rich literature on agency, but in a broad sense, when we say that someone exercises agency, this means that they have the freedom, power, and opportunities to direct and influence the course of their own lives in meaningful ways. Agency refers to your capacity to be proactive in charting and navigating the affairs of your life, rather than being victimized by it, rather than just drifting as a passenger with a journey that's mostly shaped and defined by others. Now, one of the most famous poems to express this idea of agency is the poem called Invictus by William Ernest Henley, first published in 1875. Henley was recovering from the amputation of his leg and his combat with tuberculosis, and the poem reflects his determination to be the master of his own fate, to fight his circumstances and prevail. And there's one line in his poem that I think really conveys the sense of agency. He concludes his poem with these words: "It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." And this idea of people understanding that they are the captains of their soul, that's agency. So when we seek change, we look to ourselves as agents of that change. Now, increasingly these days, when we see the Universal House of Justice making reference to the principle of participation, you will usually see both the constructs of participation and agency together. And it's important that as we discuss participation, we frame this within its proper context, because in a lot of ways, what we're talking about here is participation with agency. You see, you can use the term participation in a very passive context, like imagine watching a movie together or listening to a talk. Yes, you are participating, but you're really limited in your capacity to influence what happens. You're just a passive bystander. And this is sometimes what people mean by participation. But we mean something very different, where participation is active, where you have power to influence change, where you have voice, a say in the decision and outcome, the power to make something happen. This is a very different type of participation, and it's one which links with your sense of agency. Now, historically, when we use the term participation in Baha'i community life, it was usually in the context of what we called universal participation. And the focus here was on the breadth of participation, that all should participate, or at least as many as possible. And this is a very, very important principle and very distinctive from a Baha'i point of view. It's another key dimension of what we mean by participation. And there are at least 3 dimensions to this universal participation construct. So let's explore these 3 dimensions to universal participation before we move on to exploring agency. So the first dimension for universal participation that we're going to explore is simply what we might call attendance. Universal means all, or as many people as possible showing up or doing something. So, for example, when we talk about the fund and we talk about universal participation, we often say that the amount of your contribution is not as important as simply contributing. And we use the breadth of the number of people contributing as a yardstick reflecting the health of our community. So, the more the merrier. So this first dimension speaks to the breadth of those participating, working towards getting as many people as possible as participating on some level. And the second dimension is that we seek to make our decisions as deep as possible, with as many people supporting it as possible. Now, in Western society, our goal is majority rule. Once you hit 51% around a decision, hey, that's all you need. And so we decide and move on. But in Baha'i culture, our goal is universal support, like ideally everyone agreeing with the decision. Now, obviously, that's not always possible, and it usually may not happen. But that's our goal. Our goal is not to simply get to 51%, which is certainly more efficient and fast. Our goal is to make sure everyone is heard and that as many people as possible are on board. Now, when we can't get universality, we settle for consensus. But our goal is clear. It's universality. It's as close to all as we can get. Consensus is not our goal. It's what we settle for. Again, a big contrast with the idea of simple majority rule. And our third dimension speaks to the fact that we're not seeking hollow compliance. We don't want everyone supporting it simply to be seen as going along with it, complying so that they're not being seen as being a troublemaker. We want people to seek solutions by exploring as many angles to the problem as possible and wholeheartedly agree with the solution that emerges because they come to believe in it. So this is not just compliance for the sake of unity, although as a last resort, sometimes it might come to that. But our goal is a comprehensive, deep exchange where true diversity of views are expressed and where consultation helps guide us to the best solution at hand, and then a decision we wholeheartedly support. Now, there are societies out there in the world where universal participation is achieved, but it's hollow because no diversity of views are either shared or explored, and compliance is often mandatory. So this is very different to the type of participation we're aspiring to, one where a diversity of views is explored and where we willingly and ideally even enthusiastically choose to support an initiative. So these, I think, are the three dimensions currently prevalent in our practice of universal participation: breadth, depth, and substance. Now, our focus on universal participation builds on these three dimensions. But now, as we add in this ingredient of agency, we add in another dimension: empowerment. Because agency is empowering. It is helping you realize that you have the power to make change happen, that you are not dependent on others to make it so. And the you here is personal, like you as an individual, but the you here is also communal, like your community collectively. It has the power to make the change it wants happen. It's such a powerful construct, right? And the key here is to unleash initiative. You have the power to take initiative to translate your ideas, your aspirations into action. Okay, one more thing. A little bit of my personal editorializing here. And again, in sharing this, I remind you that I speak with absolutely no authority. My views here are no more or less valid than yours. But I'd like to share a personal observation here. If you've been following this series, you may recall that in episode 5, we explored how we learn from our mistakes. And in this context, we discussed how the Universal House of Justice explains how in our previous plans, we sometimes made mistakes we have to learn from. So in this context of exploring the theme of agency, I believe that some of the approaches that we adopted over the past 25 years or so massively stifled initiative, and in some cases cultivated a culture of compliance over initiative. I draw attention to this because if I'm right on this here, if we did cultivate compliance over initiative, then clearly we need to weed out this erroneous practice if we want to cultivate stronger initiative, if we want to empower agency. So bear with me here as we explore. Now, the Universal House of Justice identifies some of the mistakes that we made in our recent plans, and they address one of those as follows. They say, to call upon the Baha'i world to focus its energies on a certain set of activities at a particular stage in the unfoldment of the divine plan does not in any way diminish the importance of other endeavors. Now, in the plans of the past 25 years or so, this concept of focus was a new construct for Baha'i communities. We developed new capacities here, which is fantastic. And we were able to do so on a global scale, which is truly impressive. But often this occurred within a setting where what was called distractions were not tolerated. If there were core activities which communities should focus on, anything else was seen as a distraction and was actively discouraged. So, yes, we achieved focus, yep, but we did so at the expense often of initiative. Now, this push to stifle distractions reached truly absurd levels of expression. In many communities, Baha'i community life was literally reduced to core activities alone. In many communities, even sacred activities like firesides and summer schools were suddenly deemed as distractions and discouraged altogether. My mother, for example, had hosted monthly firesides for decades. Suddenly, she was ostracized for her firesides. They were deemed distractions. She should focus on core activities. So soon, she learned to comply and stopped hosting firesides altogether. Now, this chapter has now passed, but the sad reality is that she never returned to her earlier practice. Her monthly firesides are no more. That's consequence. The lack of wisdom by some forced others to abandon their initiatives with lasting consequences. Now, I think this is a truly ugly chapter in our Baha'i community experience. As you listen to me, some of you may think I'm exaggerating. Many of you, perhaps most of you even, would simply prefer sweeping this under the rug and moving on. But trust me, this was prevalent all over the Baha'i world. Maybe not in every community, but in many, many, many communities all over the world. Now, I'm not trying to be negative in raising this. Fortunately, this was a relatively short chapter in our history. We now know, because we have guidance from the Universal House of Justice, so we now know that this was all a mistake. But my point is that we need to learn from our mistakes here, because the consequence of this intolerance was that it greatly stifled people's sense of initiative. People learned to sit quietly, to not express their opinions, to not take initiative, and to limit their activities to core activities alone. So we cultivated a certain culture where the very agency that we aspire to today was actively suppressed. So now, as we call on people to exercise their agency, to show initiative, we need to recognize that we have a cultural challenge in shaking the dust off and recognizing that it's a new day. That initiative is now good again. You see what I'm saying here? The legacy culture we cultivated is at odds with our aspiration for agency. And so we need to make a conscious effort to weed out this erroneous practice in our own behaviors. We need to recognize that these legacy ideas that we practiced, even with the best of intents, is actually harmful to the vision that the Universal House of Justice is sharing with us. So be on guard unless we inadvertently suppress the initiative of anyone else. But also, if we encounter others who try to stifle our initiatives with this kind of legacy practice, recognize it for what it is and don't allow it to discourage us. It's a new day, and agency is the spirit of our new age. It's a focus for at least our next 25 years or so. And so you can move forward confidently with your initiatives once again, now informed by the principle of focus, but with a clear sense of agency. Now, so far, we've been talking about agency as a right of sorts. We focused on your right to be the master of your own destiny, both as individuals and as communities. But we need to recognize that if it's a right, it's also a responsibility. If we have the power to change our circumstances and we choose not to, well, we bear some responsibility in that decision too. The statement on social action that was prepared by the then Office of Social and Economic Development in 2012 included this reference. They said, every member of the human family has not only the right to benefit from a material and spiritually prosperous civilization, but also an obligation to contribute towards its construction. Wow. This is such a powerful idea. Everyone has the right, but also the obligation. And the key to understanding this responsibility stems from understanding our capacity for agency. Because when we don't understand, we're simply victims of our circumstances. But once we understand our capacity to influence change, then if we choose not to, well, then we're responsible to some extent for that decision. I mean, this is so profound. Now, this is something we should clearly reflect and meditate on. But for today, let's simply make the step in recognizing that agency is both a right and a responsibility. We'll leave exploring the ramifications of all of this for a future episode. Okay, for my final point today, I'd like to leave you with another personal observation. Again, full disclaimer, I'm speaking with no authority here. This is just personal observation. But once we understand agency as both right and responsibility, I think it has ramifications for the kind of action that then ensues. And this is my personal appeal to you. Because we have agency, let's focus on the things we can do, the changes we have the power to make, rather than the change that we want others to make. Again, just a personal observation here. But I find that when people come together to talk about social change, they're usually talking about a change that they want others to make. They target a group and demand change, or they want governments to pass legislation. They're always talking about how others should change. And that might have its place, so I'm not discounting that. But in truth, the person you really have the greatest capacity to influence is yourself. You have the power to change what you do, but you have limited capacity to change what someone else does. So build on that. As I said, changing others has its place, but start with the kinds of changes that you can make and build from there. And similarly, as we discussed earlier, the you here is both individual and collective. So as groups, as neighborhoods, as nuclei, as communities, focus on the change you have the capacity collectively to make. Remember, as the Universal House of Justice says, social change is not a project that one group of people carries out for the benefit of another. And again, rather, people themselves, wherever they reside, are the protagonists of their own development. Because reading the social reality of a population from within is different than studying it as an outsider. And as we read society, we form and refine a vision of our work within the social space available to us. So whether as individuals or at a collective level, we focus on the change we can make rather than simply the change we wish others would make. That's so much more impactful. Woof, there's a lot to cover with agency, right? And we've only scratched the surface here. So there's lots to reflect on, both in terms of how our concept of participation is growing and evolving with greater focus on agency, and in how agency empowers us, but how with that empowerment comes responsibility, particularly for us to influence change in our own lives at both the individual and collective level. Powerful stuff, right? Now, next time we're going to continue exploring social action, this time focusing on the two remaining principles of the 5 that we're focusing on, that our initiative should build capacity, and finally, that they should reflect an approach characterized by learning and action. So that's something to look forward to in our next episode. And finally, in closing, I'm excited to announce a new feature in our Society Builders episodes. For our first 33 episodes, we always ended the episode with our theme song, Society Builders. But now, starting with episode 34, each episode will end with a song written specifically for that day's episode. So today, for example, we'll hear a song on the power of agency, much of which will include key themes from today's episode. So this way, we'll also be able to explore our ideas with a little bit of artistic expression. Now, I'm able to do this because I recently discovered the power of using AI to write music. I think the results will really surprise you. So before you judge, give a listen and evaluate for yourself. So while I'm contributing to the lyrics, all of the instruments you hear, all of the voices you hear singing, even the music composition itself, all of that is AI generated. And it's surprisingly good. So stick around at the end of the episode for today's song, Break Free, which is all about the power of agency. And feel free to use this music however you'd like in your communities and your initiatives, etc. Well, that's it for today. Thanks again for joining the conversation for social transformation. I look forward to seeing you again next time on Society Builders.
Step outside your mind's own cage. It's time to set the page ablaze. Dreams are born from what we say. Find your voice and find your way. Power's in your thoughts, so true. Consult to build the world anew. In the circle, hearts align. Together we can change our time. Break free, find your destiny. Speak up, join the harmony. We have the power of agency when it is framed by unity. Little steps that start to build what heaven has so truly willed. We can rise above it all. Hand in hand we'll never fall. Break free, find your destiny. Speak up, join the harmony. We have the power of agency when it is framed by unity. In the wisdom we will find paths of truth for body, soul, and mind. Sharing visions we align. A tapestry our souls entwine. Join the harmony. We have the power of agency when it is framed by unity. When it is framed by unity. In the wisdom we will find paths of truth for body, soul, and mind. Sharing visions we align. A tapestry our souls entwine.